Välkommen allesammans, welcome back to the channel where we use the historical sources to speak about Norse paganism, and this is the third video in my series about blots, the Norse pagan offering or sacrifice. So I'm answering 5 questions in this series about what the actual ancient sources say about when, where, why, what, and how blots were practiced. So you can do it the most historically way possible, because as usual I see a lot of people just making things up and spreading false information about how to do these offerings. So in my last video I answered how blots were practiced, and today I'm answering where and what all the sources say about where exactly it was done. So we have 5 places basically that I've listed right here. 5 main places that the sources say a blot could be practiced. Number 1 is temples or the shrine, and these are the sources here where it mentions the blots being practiced in the temple or the shrine. So this is the ideal. A blot was preferably, if possible, practiced at the temple. Like I said, most of us today don't have the money and resources to have a pagan temple built, but some people in the pagan community actually have done this. So that's pretty good. But there's just one very important part to mention about temples before I go on to the next. When people think about a shrine or temple, and a lot of pagans today think this way, they think of it as a place that they built, and they're quite selfish about it, like, this is my shrine, this is our temple for us, our group, me, like all people today. And this is the complete opposite of what a pagan temple is meant to be. A temple in Norse pagan times was not just a place for us humans to come in and claim and use as we wish. A pagan temple was just an extension of Mother Nature that we humans at certain times could visit. So temples in pagan times, not just in Scandinavia, but all over Europe, they were built in sacred places in nature. We know this because the temples from pagan times were knocked down and had churches built over them. So I'm showing you a few photos here. We have a lot of examples of these in Norway, but it's the same thing all over Europe. So when you think about a temple, don't think about it as my temple for me and my people, and we shut the doors to everyone else and everything else. Absolutely not. Temples in pagan times would have been very much kind of like open air, outdoors type of thing, like a part of Mother Nature to take over as she pleases. Yes, it's true that, a Norse pagan temple is not going to look the same as a Greek pagan temple. There would be, of course, a little bit more closed off. They would have had walls and a roof just because of the difference in weather conditions. But a Norse temple would still very much be outdoorsy, kind of like a part of Mother Nature from all of the descriptions in these accounts that you see here. So there were, if you read any of these descriptions, there were animals that were allowed inside. There was blood splattered everywhere, guts and remains left out, and plant life inside even. It wasn't in like the town center. It was kind of outside the town in nature at a sacred place. It was a very wild, untamed thing. A pagan temple was not really like a cozy place where you can just go and hang out and be comfortable for a while. It was a part of Mother Nature. Humans would show up at certain occasions, but then they would leave any offerings there for Mother Nature to take herself. So that's all I'll say about that. If you are fortunate enough to have your own temple and place to practice, just remember that the temple is just an extension of Mother Nature. It's not a place for us humans to come and take over like a hall or a hof. So on to the next one, where burial mounds were blots also a lot of the times done. In these sources here, it lists burial mounds as being a location for blots. This is also a very important place because we have a couple sources that say blots were practiced at burial mounds in pagan times. We have records of sacred trees growing at burial mounds, and usually cattle slaughtered there, and supposedly the aim was that the blood would be dripped down through the soil and the rocks into the burial mounds where the ancestors were buried. So we have records of this from a few places in pagan Europe, actually, not just Scandinavia. But we have even more records that show this practice in Christian times. There are lots and lots of laws and records all over Scandinavia forbidding people to do a blot or even just hang around at a burial mound. These were very, very important places to the pagans, and their ancestors were buried there, and it was a key part of their religion and their practice. So, after the church came and destroyed all the temples, the burial mounds would have been the preferred place for blots and other religious activities. Like they can knock down a temple, but they're not going to be able to knock down a mound in the ground. So I was lucky enough to grow up in Norway, in Vestfold, where my family has lived as far back as we have records, and there are tons of burial mounds around that area, so I can say that most likely some of my ancestors were buried in, but not everybody is that fortunate to live in a place like burial mounds. So burial mounds are going to be difficult for most people too. So we'll go on to the next place, and this would be at an altar, or hörger. We see this in Hervarar saga, that the blot was practiced here, and I see a lot of pagans today using altars and asking about altars, how to set them up, and yes, altars were for sure used in pagan times to do a blot or offering. The problem is I see a lot of Norse pagans with altars, and they're getting the wrong idea about it. Most of them are taking the kind of modern Wicca themed altar that you just put up in your bedroom, and that's fine for Wicca people. I really like most Wicca people, more than I like most pagans that I meet, actually. But Norse paganism is not Wicca, so the altar for us Norse pagans, we want something more in nature. The Norse word for altar was hörger, and that was a stone, a big stone or a pile of stones. So a detailed description about this is in a few different sources. So it's pretty simple. You just find a big boulder or pile up a stack of rocks in some sacred place in nature. That's where your altar for blots can be if you want to practice it in the most historically accurate way. But this idea of setting up altars inside your bedroom in your house is definitely not historically accurate. So I would recommend for sure to get out in nature and use rocks or nature things as much as you can. Number 4, sacred places. So we know that there were sacred places in Norse paganism that were reserved for altars and temples and blots. But what are these sacred places actually? Well, we have a couple sources that mention this. Groves, and Adam of Bremen mentions that in his account of the pagan blot at Uppsala. And we also have a law book called Gulating that mentions what the sacred places were, and basically forbidding people from going there and then worshipping whatever spirit or whatever god they think is there. So that's these are the things that we know could be sacred places. And again, this idea of a sacred place would be best to do your offering, as I mentioned before. Ideally, you could set up your temple or altar at a sacred place. But what is it that makes a place sacred? Well, that's a long topic, and I will make a video on that about what the sources say. It's kind of conflicting, but for the most part, sacred places were considered to be something supernatural, like a supernatural type of thing that happened there. Also, a sacred place in the pagan tradition would be a place that doesn't change, basically. So if you come back there, it's going to be the same for hundreds of years or thousands of years or tens of thousands of years, some place that your ancestors have seen before you. So you go there and you see it, and like nothing has changed. My ancestors saw this thousands of years ago exactly the way it was, and it's still the same. So it brings up that kind of spiritual memory. So just think about that. I know a lot of us are not living in a place where our ancestors have lived for thousands of years, but if you are fortunate enough to do that, then some place that is not changing, such as a very, very old tree or a waterfall or some place in nature that just does not change no matter how long that it's been there. So I'll make another video about that, but sacred places are subjective at the end of the day, so any place that you feel is beautiful and you feel some power or spirit resides, then that is a good sacred place for you. And the fifth and final place that you can do a blot is in your home, in private, in your house. So I was actually wrong about this for a long time, and I talked just a ton of shit about people who were doing offerings in their own homes. Like, I used to laugh at them and say, what the hell are you offering in your home, and how are the gods, how is nature supposed to find it there? Like, you know damn well the gods aren't going to take it, and the next morning you're just going to flush it down the toilet, flush your offering down the toilet. But I was actually a little bit wrong for saying this for so many years. In reality, there was actually a certain time and occasion that doing a blot in the home was acceptable, and it was alpha blot. That was the offering to the elves, or the ancestral spirits. But it was very, very private, and we don't know how this was practiced really. If you read the poem Austerafravisur, it tells how the skald was not allowed into any of the pagan people's homes because they were practicing alpha blot, and it was very private, meant for a close family, and they didn't want to let him in. So that's the only time we have records of an offering being given in the home, but we have some evidence about where the offering should have taken place, and it comes from Scandinavian folk tales later on in time, and it tells people basically leaving food or cakes out to the elves of other spirits, and it would be either on the windowsill, it could be outside the door, or it could be on a tree stump on the property. These folk tales are from much later on in time, and we're not sure if this practice is pagan actually, but if you ask me, I think for sure it is, and it makes sense because the blot or offering needs to be taken somehow by the elves or by the ancestral spirits, and maybe they come in the form of birds or other small critters. So even if you were doing alpha blot in the home, it would make sense to leave the offering outside, someplace where nature had some access to it. But anyway, that's just my opinion. Either way, from what the sources say, there is really no need to do a blot in your home unless it was alpha blot. Like I said, watch my other video about what to do a blot for, but this was specifically for the elves or for the ancestral spirits. But that's about it for the sources here, guys. If you want to practice historically accurate way, it's these 5 places that a blot or offering can be practiced. So a lot of aspects about the blot is going to be very, very difficult to practice 100% historically accurately in our modern day. But at least the location, you know, it's not that much to ask that we do it the right way, because it's pretty easy for us. We can go set up a rock or stone altar in nature very easily, and this would be a totally acceptable, accurate place to practice a blot that was also done by the ancient Norse. Even hundreds of years after, in pagan times, in the 1600s, when doing a blot was super illegal and you could be burned at the stake for practicing a blot. We have records of people even then going out and leaving offerings in the trees and at burial mounds. So if they could get out of their house and do this with all that risk, I think we should be able to do the same in the modern day in 2020. So stay tuned, I'll be releasing my next 2 videos soon about why to practice a blot and what to offer and what all the sources say about that. So that's it for this video. Vi ses nästa gång.